Good morning. This is citizenship and immigration attorney Parviz Malakouti Fitzgerald. Today is October 27th, 2025, and this is our 45th mobility space. Today we're talking about the question, will passports die? As a reminder to everybody, this is our 45th mobility space in our series of 50 that we're doing this year on the hottest topics in dual citizenship, freedom of movement, sovereignty, and of course, passports, which is one of the topics that we'll be talking about today. Everybody can speak. All you have to do is hit the request button. I will approve it right away. And although we probably are going to talk about we are going to talk about passports today. We're not constrained in our topics. We can talk about, especially towards the end, anything we want. So if we want to talk about the Portugal Golden Visa news or anything else, we could talk about anything. Okay, so the question. So I put this question out: will passports die? Because I've kind of been curious and following this trend that we're seeing, or that I think we're seeing, of substitutes for passports being used in limited situations and limited contexts for international travel. Okay, so for traveling borders internationally, and not just borders, but controlled borders. So I think it's an interesting topic. I wanted to get together, talk about some of the things that I've noticed, and of course, hear from the hive mind, hear from some of the regulars that are hardcore citizenship and passport aficionados in this call. So first of all, let me define a few terms here. So what I'm talking about when I say passport is a physical passport card, right? And I think we have to really define what we're talking about, because we're starting to see now, as we go more digitally, that people, entities, countries are starting to reference digital documents as passports as well, right? So when I say passport, I'm talking about a physical passport. Um, what is a passport? So passport, first and foremost, legal identity. Okay, so it is government issued, sovereign backed legal identity. Number two, a travel document, valid travel document for travel between countries, especially controlled borders. And then third, a passport is sometimes rebuttable proof of citizenship. Okay, sometimes. Okay, so a passport issued to a national of a particular country, right, is proof of citizenship. But it's rebuttable, right? Doesn't mean it's the final say. I mean, it can be difficult to rebut that, but that can be rebutted, and it is rebutted in many different contexts, and we've spoken about that before. So this is what I define as a passport. This is what I'm referring to. This is what I see as the primary three functions of a passport. And we look at, depending on who you are, a lot of people, I think most people, look at passports as kind of freedom tools. They look at it as a representation of freedom, ability to move around. But I think there's also kind of a darker side as well, which is some people, and I might fall in this second category, some people look at a passport as kind of a reminder of being locked into a nation state that defaults to only recognizing a passport for international travel through controlled borders. Now, the reason I say defaults is because that's not always the case. You can pass through some controlled borders without a passport. We'll talk about some of those examples today. But that's kind of the exception. The default on the international scale is using a valid government issued passport for travel between control borders, right? So a couple of examples that I just like to throw out there. So first of all, U.S. passport card. We've spoken about this before ad nauseum at this call, especially or in the spaces, because we have so many Americans that are regular listeners. So U.S. passport card, of course, issued to U.S. citizens and U.S. nationals, U.S. national non-citizens, and can be used for overland travel to Canada and Mexico. It can also be used for closed loop cruises, right? So cruises where you start in the United States, there's a closed loop, and then you end up back in the United States, right? Is a passport card a different thing, or is it just actually a passport? By my definition today, I'm going to treat it as a different thing. Okay, passport card different from a passport book, even though, of course, in many contexts and for the purposes of, for example, 8 USC 1185B, a U.S. passport card is treated as a substitute for a passport. I'm sorry, passport card is treated as a substitute for a passport book. That's one thing. Number two, okay, so at least in theory, people who are residents in Mercosur countries can travel between those countries using a cedula, so an ID, given if they have visa-free access to that country due to their nationality. Okay, so that is something that I've written about before. We've talked about this before. In theory, that is supposed to be the case. So in that case, and nationally issued legal ID is being used as a passport substitute. European Union. Okay, so many countries in the EU issue national IDs to their citizens, and a lot of their citizens use those IDs in order to enter back into the European Union and the Schengen zone. And then, of course, for the most part, people typically don't need really to produce any ID to travel between Schengen countries, because usually there's not a control, an immigration control. And then the other thing, actually, I guess fourth. What am I on? Four, three. Third thing that I wanted to bring up is Dubai. Dubai is experimenting, or not really experimenting. They've pretty much rolled it out. This smart gates, okay, which is basically control to enter the country through a combination of biometrics and facial recognition. And it actually, as I haven't, full disclosure, I have not gone through it yet personally, okay, to get the firsthand experience. But from what I read and from what I hear, the person is not required to actually carry their passport book with them, provided they're already in the smart gates system. So the idea is that the first time that you go through to Dubai and you enter the system, after that you can use smart gates and not have to use your passport. Now that's not available to everybody, as I understand. It's limited to UAE citizens, residents, and then people who have visa-free access or visa on arrival access to the Schengen zone. And then finally, the fourth topic, or the fourth, I guess, example that I'd like to bring up. And by the way, I will ask other people. I'm sure other people on this call have also examples that they can think of. Please bring them up. But the news that came out in the spring that we talked about with Apple Wallet being able to use, or basically people being able to access and use their U.S. passport card on Apple Wallet in order to travel through TSA domestically. Okay, so this is not really for international travel. It's well, not really. It's not for international travel currently. It's for being able to board flights to travel domestically within the United States. But obviously, this just begs the question: is this is just a precursor of what's to come? Is Apple eventually going to work out deals with one foreign country, break the seal, say, hey, we can provide access to a U.S. citizen's U.S. passport for them to enter this country, and then expand from there. I would suspect that Apple is going to probably try to do something like that. I don't have anything to support that. It's just my speculation, but I think that's an interesting development to follow. So these are some of the things that I'm seeing, and I'm wondering: are passports, are they eventually going to die? Are they eventually going to be replaced? If they're replaced, are they going to be first replaced primarily by electronic items, or are they going to be replaced by a hodgepodge of other physical documents like a passport card, a cedula, or a combination thereof? Let's say Apple Wallet plus, let's say, a cedula of a Mercosur country resident that wants to use it. So that's my introduction. Those are my thoughts. I got we got a lot of people here. This is great. We got Alex, we got Annalisa, Patrick, my great co-host. We got David, we got Inverted. I'm going to invite a lot of people to speak here. I'm sending speaker requests, and then I'm going to throw out my first question to Patrick. So Patrick, general question. I like to start you off with general questions so that you can take it whatever direction you like. My first question to you is, do you think we're trending away from use of physical passport books on the international, scale? And secondly, do you think it's a positive or a negative for individual freedom of movement?
I actually think that the trend will be at the cutting edge of at the tip of the spear, as we say. It will be fewer uses of a passport, but I still think for the large part, a passport's going to remain, at least on the back end, and I'll explain why. I think at the end of the day, a passport proves who you are. And it is the kind of gold standard, because if we don't know who you are, at least we can go to the country that says you are who you say you are. In an effect, a passport is an internationally accepted form of ID that is an insurance policy backed by the government that issued it. So if you think of a passport as kind of like an insurance policy on your identity, as scary as that may sound, then you can see that, if you break that down into regions, Some regions might say, oh, you don't need a passport to cross this border. And so it's because those are closed end systems, like, for example, a closed end cruise ship, where you don't need that ultimate insurance policy to say you are who you say you are, and so I think you see that with more, I hate to borrow the term, but let's just say like more like Western or generally more accepted passports are going to probably provide you with, greater potential to not use a passport. Let me give you an example. So, um, if you have an enhanced driver's license in the United States, you can cross the border into Canada by land with just your enhanced driver's license. It has a biometric reader in it, so that CBP and RCMP can read it on both ends of the border. And so if you're traveling from, historically, one of the better crossings between the U.S. and Canada was the Thousand Island International Crossing. You could theoretically use your enhanced driver's license there. You don't need a passport. But if you are a foreign national, there's no way you can have that occur because you're not a citizen. And so you have to be a U.S. citizen to have an enhanced driver's license. Um, if you come from a country like the European Union, you can use your European Union ID within all the member states of the EU. But if you're from a country that does not have a great insurance policy on the identity of its citizens, let's say the country of Senegal, you're probably going to be using your passport way more and even pre-clear with visas because that insurance policy on your ID is not as accepted by other nations. And so that's my long-winded way of saying, as the world regionalizes, I think you'll see examples of where a passport is not needed. I did not know about the Dubai access. That makes sense because with facial recognition technology, there might be a case where you initiate once with your passport, but then from thereafter, they snag a photo of you over the years and back that up against their database and say, oh no, well now your face is, or now your retinal scan is, your ID, and that very well could be, but typically that process starts with a passport. So I think as we kind of regionalize, the world regionalizes that the use of the passport explicitly won't be as needed, but I still think it'll be there in the background. And whether or not, that's a good thing or a bad thing, I mean, I think it's a good thing for mobility. But on the flip side, I think it does put a lot more trust in the technology that reads other things relevant to your identity that is not your passport, like facial recognition, you know, like a retinal scan. We already have a fingerprints database for those who, elect into it or are forced into it. And on top of that, someday there'll be widespread use of gait recognition, which supposedly will be used in our lifetime. But be that as it may, the key policy is that they want to know who you are, and if there's ways to verify that without a passport between two countries that um, have a good sense of each other's kind of insurance policy against their citizens, then I think you'll see it used, that digital aspect used a lot more. So hopefully that was not too wordy and complicated of an answer.
Yeah, that's a great summary, Patrick. On one hand, you have more things that can get you into another country, right? Retinal scan, biometrics, etc. But on the other hand, you're now moving from giving information from in a less indexable system or set of systems to a more indexable set of systems, right? Which to me is a concern, right? Like, for I think how you fall on this issue depends on how trustful you are of government. I'm highly distrustful, so I like it when there's little silos of information. Okay, I like it if U.S. Department of State is not in perfect communication and information sharing with the FBI and with NSA and TSA and all those. Albeit obviously that provides, that creates friction, okay, when sometimes you basically want them to be in communication. But overall, I tend to think that that's actually a net benefit for individual freedom and sovereignty. Let me just kick back one follow-up question to you, Patrick, and then I'll go to Alex and a few others. Overall, are you do you like the gains in mobility in exchange for going into more indexable systems, or overall, do you kind of see it as a net negative in your estimation?
In my estimation, the more indexable information there is, the less room there is for error. And let me explain with an example. If you have a biometric indicator on your passport or in your passport card or in an enhanced driver's license, it usually contains what they call biometric markers, right? Which is your height, your weight as you reported it, presuming you didn't get fat. Uh, your eye color, identifiable information in a predetermined, list of classifications, right? That's why, at least from an American perspective, there was this a little bit of discussion around whether or not you can indicate gender on a passport. Remember, there was like male, female, and then there was X. That being an identifiable characteristic on a passport is part of like what makes it easy to index. Where there's room for error is suddenly is where they're measuring facial recognition. So your face by definition will never be the same between two photos. Whether or not likeness can be, attributed between the two of them depends on the level of technology. And so, how good that technology is an open question. Sometimes it might be too good, and therefore, there is a question of both privacy and also a question of, what percentage confidence you have in that technology. Is it 99% or is it 99.99%? Because if you're screening 108 million people a year through, say, the Atlanta airport, chances are that policy error is going to that error percentage is going to show up pretty significantly. So I think the more a passport provides indexed information, the easier it is to confidently use as a tool for identity across international borders.
Alex, do you see a trend? Are we moving away from passport books? If so, where do you think we're moving to? And follow up, you think it's good for individual freedom for the aspiring sovereign individual? Is this a good net development or?
Yeah, I think the future will be mobile. There'll be, like as you mentioned, the Apple Wallet application. I think there'll be other things like that come about, and probably only need one country for it to take off because people will like the experience. One issue I had recently when I was traveling is one of the people I was traveling with, they didn't have many book pages left in their passport book, and so the immigration officer was giving them a hard time that they need to get a new passport book, they shouldn't be let in the country, blah blah blah. And this is someone whose passport has all these inconveniences like that could be solved by a passport application. And also, there's the speed of getting it. Most countries are pretty backed up at the moment. So I think a lot of people would appreciate being able to renew their passport at a click of a button. If you even have to renew it at all, maybe you need to submit a new photo every once in a while. But generally, I think it will provide a lot of convenience for people. And so once it's demoed, other countries will start to copy it to remain competitive. And it's also cheaper for countries as well to be able to provide digital services rather than be shipping stuff around and managing all these different pieces of paper and passport photos and stuff like that. So I think the mobile will be the future of it, most likely. In terms of if it's good or not, it depends on what you value. So there's certainly risk that it can be used against you, just like the current introduction of the passport 100 years ago heavily restricted people's travels rights. So there's certainly potential for that. But for your average person who already is in the system, and especially those getting residencies and passports in different places, I mean, they're already pretty deep in the system, and so probably it's a net benefit for them. But even if they don't use it personally, they can benefit from others using it, like with TSA pre-check. I never got TSA pre-check because I didn't want to consent to all the extra surveillance, but I benefited from other people getting it because it sped up lines in general. So that's also a possibility in this case as well, that if you don't want it, you can still benefit from other people getting it, and thus reducing the delays for getting a passport book.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, if you're a person, if you're a person who acknowledges that there's conveniences to going more online, but those conveniences are not worth your perceived cost and vulnerability to, the governments and your information being out there, you might still benefit from other people deciding that the convenience is worth it for them, right? Because they might take pressure over off of the processing of physical passport books. Annalisa, if you can speak, and I don't mean to throw you on, or not throw you under the bus, but I don't mean to put the spotlight on you, put you on the spot. You're kind of one of those people that values the convenience more than any perceived, I guess, vulnerability to the information being out there. Is that a fair statement? David, I got David here. Um, where do you fall on the question of this cost benefit? Okay, increased inconvenience possibly in exchange for decreased privacy and increased vulnerability to governments having your information digitalized, centralized, etc. So I guess first, do you see that as kind of the trade-off? I guess that's my first question. And two, if you do, you think it's a net positive or negative?
I think that does capture the trade-off. I suspect that whatever we may have had in the past of privacy over the decades that have come before now has largely been lost already. So although it is a further erosion of privacy to have such things associated with passports and other identification for crossing borders, I suspect that whatever marginal loss of privacy is there is minimal at best. Now, one thing I'm curious about is whether different governments have cross-border agreements that allow them to instantaneously authenticate different identity documents from other countries. I don't know if it's something in the Five Eyes or something that different governments may have worked out for border crossings, but something that would allow them to scan the chip in a passport or some other smart ID card, and it would authenticate with I guess a Department of State or something like that to say, is this a legitimate passport? Is it in good standing? Tell us about this person. What do what kind of information? I don't know what kind of information there might be actually. What one government would inform another about, but I'm surprised if something like that doesn't already exist. But maybe some people on the call have more information about such a system.
Yeah, good question. I actually don't know. I don't know if, in addition to just getting the info from the chip in the passport, most countries are also cross-referencing that directly with intelligence sharing. With the country that issued the passport.
Yeah.
Um,
And if it doesn't exist already, I can't help but imagine that that's where we'd be going next.
Oh, I can add to this a little bit actually. Um, so the biometric readers on a passport, which are indicated by that little camera-looking symbol on a passport, that's just a machine readable. Um, uh, it basically communicates close to what already exists in your passport. It communicates that in a machine readable way. So when you go to your passport kiosk, it pulls up that information. Obviously, they usually flash that against an immigration or security database, right? And the idea is that if you have someone's name, there's probably going to be multiple people with that similar name. But the more pieces of information you introduce, the more likely you are to get a specific person. So if you're looking for John Smith and there's 12 additional pieces of information, the chances that there's another John Smith with those exact pieces of information is pretty much zero. And the ultimate unique identifier on it is the passport number and the issue and the expiration date. And so all that information is collected. And so when you get a new passport issued, it usually, of course, has a new passport number and a new issue date, but everything else is the same. And so there's a way to kind of ensure who you say you are. It's a tool for identity. And so the reason that, say, for example, the enhanced driver's license example I used also has a biometric card reader in it for CBP and RCMP between the US and Canada. That's because Canada has enough trust in the United States that cards issued by a state, even if they have the same information, are verifiable and they have trust in that system. But, say for example, you have a card issued by, you know, a specific region in Italy. You have an ID that may be a federal ID, but they're not issued from the federal government in Rome. They're issued from the federal government in Liguria or Tuscany. Well, a foreign government might not have the amount of traffic of people from that specific region to say, oh, we verify this, even if it communicates the same federal standard as would a passport. And so there's this game between how much information is shared, can we verify it, and do we trust the issuing government, even if that issuing government may be local or regional. And so I think there's that kind of game. I think that's why on some of these regionality documents, the cedula within Mercosur or an enhanced driver's license or passport card for land crossings, land borders in Canada. I believe it's also applicable for Mexico and the Bahamas and like a couple others. That's kind of that paradigm to appreciate whether or not something is accepted or not. I mean, I don't know if
Yeah,
that answers every question, but it's
that
it's
that,
an
that makes
ongoing
sense.
thought
But I'm
process.
I'm also curious about whether any governments have agreements in place that allow them to, let's say you scan your passport and your passport number and expiration date and your name pops up on the screen. If there's any way for the country that you're entering to authenticate, let's say with a United States Department of State server somewhere, and say, hey, this person is trying to enter your country, our country, and is this passport still in good standing, or has it been canceled for some reason, even if it's unexpired? Is this person current on their taxes? Is this person I don't know. There are all kinds of ways that this could be used. We've heard stories about um, how identity is being used in China for different services, and you hear all about 1984 style horror stories and Black Mirror episodes and things like that, in ways that we can be surveilled and tracked, and limitations can be imposed upon our liberty based on these things. It would just shock me if such a system isn't being built already, if it hasn't already been implemented.
Yeah, I actually, that is a great question. I know that you can. I don't think it's quite to the point where it's in real time yet. I think if you're, say, an American going to Europe and you go through immigration in Europe, if there's an Interpol notice out for you, which is an EU focused organization, that will flag in real time at immigration, right? But if the US government is like, hey, we have an issue with you, or this passport was expired, I don't know yet if that's a real time feedback loop. Those countries do share information. So, it could be, your passport, let's say your passport was canceled, but you still physically hold it and you use it at an international border crossing. The chances that it's going to be acknowledged in real time, I don't know, but it would be acknowledged probably shortly thereafter. And then there would be, then the US government would say, oh, this person is wanted. They're traveling on an expired passport or a canceled passport. And then Interpol would issue a notice. And, so there is this like coordination aspect after the fact. But the real time question, I think, is a good one, because if it's not in place now, I would imagine it would be at some point in our lifetime.
Yeah, I'm a software developer, and I don't see any reason why that couldn't be done. So it would really shock me if it wasn't being done. So anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
I think.
Sorry, I just wanted
Oh,
to interject. I agree with you, David, and that's part of why I'm like, I don't like the trend, and why. I mean, I concede that it's more convenient to have a lot of these documents available, on your cell phone or whatever it is electronically. But I'm not convinced that that convenience outweighs, the threat, the vector of government having all of these pieces of information available in real time and highly indexable and highly cross-referenceable. Not because people want to live like criminals or anything like that. I'm just distrustful, right, of what government does with this, even with good people, with law-abiding people, etc.
Well, certainly.
What we're seeing,
I totally agree with your feelings on the matter, but I for better or for worse, probably for worse, I think that companies such as Palantir are probably already collecting all that information, and so I think whatever privacy we would hope not to lose has probably already been lost.
Yeah.
what if it's more of an issue? What if it's more of an issue as this is a potential attack vector by either an individual that's rogue within a position of power within a state, or even the state itself? Two examples. In a hypothetical world where we do not even have a passport booklet to attempt to defend ourselves, we only have a digital copy. This would seem like a pretty easy attack vector for at least certain members of the Trump administration right now to even dispute the validity of documents, simply harass people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's in the United States. I've heard stories of certain Latin American countries where, when XYZ person, who's a person of notoriety, whatever that means, is coming in, there are potentially bad actors within the government itself as part of whatever border control that gets these people's IDs and is able to send this off to other people. If this can happen with paper, sure, but it's...
But to follow up on the point, what is different in the paper version versus digital version? You could actually have better access controls on the digital version. You could require someone to sign off if they make any changes, such as a suspension, and you could even require an access log for any time someone views it as well. Whereas your paper file sitting there in some office when you send in your information, you don't know who took photos on their phone, who made photocopies, what they did with them. And there's lots of examples of NSA employees abusing their power with the current system.
Right. I'm more getting at the fact that you, a person sitting now in front of whoever, have no way to dispute what they are telling you. Meaning, I'm now in a foreign country. How can I defend myself if I don't even have a document that I know to be mine? I can't argue with what their computer says.
Why can't you print it out?
How do I compel them to do this?
I don't think it's too hard for them to put in a print version. It seems like an important feature, even in the age of digital boarding passes and stuff. You can almost always print it out.
Who's going to believe a printed picture of whatever on a normal 8.5 by 11? Like, it's got to be in some official capacity if it's going to have any meaning.
Alex, when I'm hearing you describe this, I can't help but think that you're assuming the benevolence of the people that control the system, and I don't agree. I mean, that's I what Inverted is saying. I mean, it hits home to me. I mean, what if, let's say, I mean, this might be sci-fi, okay, but what if you're deleted from the system? Everything's electronic, right? And in fact, I think there might be a movie. Is it Enemy of the State or something? There might be some movie where this type of thing happened, where it's like somebody's targeted. they're deleted from the system. Okay, there's no evidence of them, being there or whatever. It doesn't have to be because of some great grand conspiracy. The government makes mistakes. They do it all the time. We know that. There's attack vectors both from malevolence as well as just incompetence. Okay, that's a normal thing. In August of 2025, 3 months ago, okay, 2 months ago, okay, the United States Library of Congress website amended the language of the U.S. Constitution, okay, to remove the part regarding habeas. Okay, habeas is basically a legal mechanism whereby you can sue the government to basically, release you physically, and it's a really, really important mechanism, to fight against government abuse and overreach and control. For a day or half a day, that clause was deleted from the Library of Congress website. And I think it bears mentioning that this came shortly after Trump and his press secretary were talking about what they want to do to try to get around habeas. Okay, so that the Library of website, the Library of Congress website was changed. People noticed it. There was an uproar. They changed it right away. But I think that's illustrative. What if we didn't have, what if every great American didn't have a written copy of their U.S. Constitution, right? What if we were entirely reliant upon the digital versions of documents to prove people's identities, their citizenship, all this type of stuff? We could see and experience that type of abuse, right? When you have a document,
the opposite.
okay.
What's
Go ahead.
more secure than a blockchain?
What's more secure in my possession than a blockchain is a document that I have in my possession. It's not mutable from a third party, remote, accessor.
How do you know that document is valid? I mean, think of a passport. Your passport can be invalid if you have a stamp in there that's not a government stamp. If you go to Legoland or something and have them stamp your passport, it can be invalidated. I mean, there's all kinds of ways your physical book.
Hang on, that's not arguing in good faith.
But here's the thing. Let me respond. Let me respond to Alex. Here's the thing. Okay, I'm not saying that the passport that you have in your hand is it has maximum legal validity, okay, just because it's in your physical presence. Okay, we know that can be canceled. We know that can be revoked remotely. Okay, so I mean, the Snowden situation, he had his passport. He was traveling over, what was it, the Atlantic, I think, if I'm not mistaken, when U.S. Department of State canceled his passport. So he has the physical thing in his hand. Okay, the legal effect of it has been changed, okay, by U.S. Department of State canceling that passport. Okay, but he still has a document, okay, that he can use to argue from, okay, in whatever jurisdiction he is, in whatever context he's in, okay. Maybe it's canceled as a travel document, still valid as legal ID, right? That's U.S. passports work like that sometimes in some contexts. Okay, you can have a passport that's been expired for a year and a half. You cannot travel internationally on it, but it's still legal proof of your identity. So there is a robustness there by a physical document that's in your hand that just government bureaucrats or whoever cannot just entirely unilaterally erase any sign of it whatsoever. So I don't see that as as a step forward. I mean, all your examples, Alex, it assumes the benevolence of the people who have the system. You said they can print it, they can do this, they can have two-factor authentication, whatever. Well, that assumes that the people that are in control in that moment are acting in good faith, okay, that they're acting lawfully, okay, that they're not whatever happening to them. And I don't operate from that assumption, in the world of passports and mobility or others. There's just too many counterexamples, and we don't even have to go back into history. I mean, we can look just in the last 6 months, and there's tons and tons of examples of government actors acting unlawfully in the United States and elsewhere. And people have to fight back, and when you're fighting back in a legal proceeding, whether it be an administrative appeal or before court, an Article 3 judge or whatever, you need proof. That's the basis to make your case or your claim for whatever it is that you're trying. You need proof. Proof is a really big deal. If your proof exists only in a computer or Ethernet or even the blockchain, and and you cannot have physical access to that, I think that's more of a vulnerability. I don't think it's less of a vulnerability. But I'd love to hear the counterclaim if you see otherwise, or if anybody else does.
I would say the ideal situation is that they give you a digital version of the document that's some kind of PDF, and then it's hashed and published to a blockchain so that any third party can verify the authenticity of this document that you have. And you can show your printout document and say, look, this QR code takes you to where you can verify the authenticity. The government, using their official signature, published it to the blockchain, and therefore you can see that it was a valid issued document. And that would give you all of the benefits that you described, plus the lack of the physical downsides of it being damaged or lost or stolen. And probably not in the average place, but it will be in this
Alex, you're cutting
implementation.
off for me there, but got you. Yeah, I lost the last few seconds, but I think I caught the gist of what you're saying, and I'm inclined to agree. I'm inclined to agree that if you can get both, that's probably the best case scenario. Of course, it raises other issues, but no solution, doesn't have some weakness. I mean, obviously, then there could be a delta in the information between the two. But overall, I'm inclined to agree that would be a best case scenario where you have some version of this thing that you rely upon to function in society, let alone to travel internationally. You cannot function in society without being able to prove your legal identity. And I'm maybe I'm getting old. I feel like if I was, if I feel like if I was a 20-year-old listening to me now, maybe it'd be like, oh, the boomer wants the paper in his hands. He doesn't trust the computers. But yeah, I think one is more secure with having some access to proof that cannot be changed remotely.
Oh, guys, I get to jump in here with two examples that I think you will appreciate. The first one is the Palau digital ID, because it is both a physical ID and they issue a digital version of the ID, which you can store on the blockchain. Now, it's not a passport, but to my knowledge, that is the only ID out there that offers that type of functionality, both digitally and physically. And second, I was going to use the example of Canadian proof of citizenship, which is not a passport, but it is citizenship. Since 2012, they issue those digitally, and it is a printout with the Canadian coat of arms, um, but it has a scannable barcode on it. Part of it gets back to your example where you can physically print that out, and if you need to get something like a passport or social insurance number, which is Canada's version of a social security number, or a tax ID or something like that. Um, Historically, you would have to send in your original proof of citizenship, which is quite a risk, right? I don't want to trust the Canadian Post with anything. Um, but if you have a digital form, you just print it out and it's verified through that digital barcode scan. Now, you run into the issues where one actor can invalidate the digital form of it, but you still physically have a version of it that shows that at least theoretically at one point you were, right. There's no insurance policy like the blockchain, but it does highlight those differences between something like a Palau digital ID versus something else. And I won't get into it too deeply, but I believe also there are certain places in Mexico now where your um, vital records can be ordered digitally, and when you print them out, they're verifiable through a barcode. So kind of interesting, but
Yeah,
I still think we're a long ways away from having a form of that that's secure. I think the having something physically in your possession is still inherently uh, uh, more of an insurance policy for an individual than a state.
great examples, Patrick. I just want to piggyback. So first of all, I have a client that we're applying for Mexican citizenship by descent for. He was actually born in Mexico, but he naturalized before Mexico completely legalized dual citizenship. And we got his birth certificate. I forget the state, but you're right. It has a barcode in it. It's verifiable and accessible digitally. I'm glad you brought up the Palau digital residency and ID. As some people in the space know, I've been kind of doing, no, not kind of, I've been doing field reports, experimenting with seeing what the Palau digital residency ID can be used for. So I go around. I have about 6-7 experiments that I have, field reports partially written up that I haven't published yet. But I think I've published 25 or 26 so far. And the vast majority of the times that I've used the Palau digital residency ID, successfully or unsuccessfully, there's been no attempt to verify digitally, the identity. It's just been looking at the card, sometimes scanning the barcode, right? But I would say it's a minority of the time. But most of the time, it's looking at the ID and just making a call, on the authenticity of the document, of the ID, and whether they think it's sufficient to prove my ID for the purposes that I need it for, whether it be buying alcohol or getting a notarization or applying for a birth certificate, etc. So we are getting more techie, but still, when you're going around in your everyday life, and I recognize we're kind of a little outside of the context a bit of talking about border crossing, but still, when we go around in our life, most of the time you're showing ID. Sometimes it's being scanned for the information on the barcode. Sometimes it's not. But there's still very little, at least in the United States, and in my opinion, probably in most countries, there's still very little of trying to verify identity details by cross-referencing with an online database or something like that. Now, one thing I do want to talk about or just mention with regards to crossings, we've spoken about kind of going through borders, with a passport, a chip, a machine readable passport, presenting the passport, having it scanned, etc. The reality is that doesn't happen all the time. In fact, a lot of times it doesn't happen like that. For whatever reason, either the machine is down or there's some change in the protocol. People present their passports, and sometimes just the passports are read, even if they're machine readable passports. They're just looked at physically, manually by the border officer, and the person goes through. And sometimes they're not even looked at. Sometimes people present themselves at a border crossing point, and I'll use an example from the United States, but this happens in other places too, and they're just what's called waved through. Now, in the context of the United States, this has happened so many times that a person coming overland from Canada or Mexico has presented themselves at the border and been waved through, without their passport being looked at or reviewed or whatever, even if they had the passport on them. That there's even a whole doctrine and body of case law in U.S. immigration law to deal with this, because in order to apply for a green card from within the United States, you have to prove that you had legal entry. The problem is so many hundreds of thousands of people were waved through that they didn't have that proof. Somebody applied for a green card. The last name was Quilanton. Excuse me, I think it was a male actually, Quilanton. He was denied. He appealed. And this created case law on the topic that basically said that if you can be approved for adjustment of status if you have what's called a Quilanton entry or a wave through entry. So this happens enough in practice that there's case law to address the issue, right? Now, granted, that was from couple decades ago, right? It's less frequent now, to have wave through crossings like that, but it still happens. Why is it relevant to this conversation? Well, sometimes, we're entering countries and exiting countries, and we might have the machine readable document. We might have the document that's indexable, but it might not be used, So I still think there's some freedom there, a little bit of a freedom arbitrage in having the physical document that you can sometimes use to cross borders lawfully, totally lawfully, But for whatever reason, friction or, an issue with the border point or undermanning or understaffing, still your document is not fully scanned, right? Or still, for example, if it's the case of the Dubai gates or whatever, still you don't give all that extra information, your biometrics, your retinal scan, your facial recognition, etc. So that's also part of the reason I'm still attached to the idea, for freedom-seeking individuals, for aspiring sovereign individuals, I'm still attached to the idea of having physical documents, because I still see them being used in practice, and in those crossings, less information is given, less personal information is given.
Yeah, this is Gabo here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir. Welcome, Gabo.
Thank you. Yeah, well, the topic is will passports die? And to me, the absolute answer to that is yes, 100% they will die. But the conversation seems to be mostly around the physical booklet. Will the physical booklet die? And to me, the bigger question with passports is whether your travel freedom is going to be determined by the circumstances of your birth. In other words, will your travel identity be tied up so strongly with your nationality? And I think that is the bigger question, because I think in the future, that is not going to be the case. And I remember reading a tweet from whoever it was, Christian Hendrickson, I think is his name. He's the founder of IMI Daily. And he said basically something to the effect of, in 100 years, it's not going to matter, where you're born. And I agree with him. I think in the future, I don't know how long, but in the future, we're going to have some sort of alternative to these nation state issued booklets, whether it's digital or physical, that allows us to travel. I mean, why should somebody who's born in Nigeria, for example, or India, who's well-to-do and has plenty of money and is very secure and no crime, why should he not be able to travel to the same places that somebody from some other country be able to travel? And I think this problem is more and more pronounced. You're seeing YouTubers and stuff, complaining about how they can't travel anywhere through no fault of their own. And so I think in the future, I don't know what it will look like, but I think we'll have, instead of like a passport issued by your country, again, whether it's digital or physical, I think we'll have something like you can prove to some intergovernmental body of people or intergovernmental organization or whatever, prove your ID, prove who you are, etc. And it's recognized by a large number of countries, maybe not all countries, okay, but maybe 80% of countries say, yeah, if you can prove yourself enough to this, rigorous test that you don't have a criminal record and so on, and you get some sort of travel approval from that body, that you will be able to travel around the world wherever you want, and you don't have to have what we would think of today as a passport, which is a nation-state issued document. And I think that's going to be the future. Now, I'm not saying whether that's a good thing or bad thing. I do think it will be a great thing for a lot of people who are in poor countries who basically are discriminated against unfairly. But I also think it presents new risks in that people will have to sort of submit their information to this, big brother sort of Uber body, which is like, kind of George Orwellian possibly. So I think that's potentially a risk. But I think that's ultimately where things are going to go. And as far as the whole digital versus physical, I think, as John Richardson would say, this is essentially the obituary's been written. It just hasn't happened yet. The world's going digital, and Alex had it so right. That's not to say that I think everything is going to be great about it. I think there's going to be potentially some risks, but we live in a world of convenience, and this whole idea that you have to physically carry around a booklet where your whole life is kind of screwed if you lose it, especially if the country that you're in doesn't have an embassy. Or you don't have enough empty pages left. I mean, this is just crazy. In 2025, I think we absolutely are going to be switching things digitally. Again, there are risks, and you guys have talked about them. I will also say with the blockchain technology, one of the nice things about it, if it's a public blockchain and it's decentralized, it's not some government basically database, but it's a real blockchain, is that every change that you make to the blockchain is forever viewable. So if somebody tries to further down the line, cancel somebody or change somebody's information or whatever, some government, for example, that change would be visible on the blockchain. So I think Alex actually had a lot of things right when he was talking. That's not to say I don't think there will be some disadvantages.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of interesting comments there. To be clear, and maybe I wasn't clear on this. I do think we're moving towards digitally. I mean, that I don't think anybody can stop that. My comments were about whether it's a net increase in freedom and whether it's better for the individual. Right? We're 100, 200 years from now, yeah, it's all going to be digital. We all exist now, though, right? All the people in this space, right? Right now, we're in a shift period. Maybe it's going to be a multi-decade shift period. What I'm kind of curious about in the short term is does a freedom-seeking individual act to lean into the change or kind of lean back from the change, right? That's kind of what I was more trying to get at, Gabo. But a couple other things. So, travel freedom being tied to nationality, or excuse me, to where the person's from. Um, People constantly talk about this as passport strength, visa free, and I'm responding to you, Gabo, but I'm not saying necessarily that you think this is the case. But I just want to be clear because this is such a point of contention. Visa free access is a function of nationality, not of passport. That is an extremely important point, and one that I think a lot of people just think, oh yeah, that makes sense, but they don't really intuitively absorb. It's about the nationality. People that are from countries that have weak visa-free access, they're vulnerable. They have passport vulnerability, not because the country has poor visa-free access, but because some countries are just difficult to get passports from. Okay, they're dysfunctional. There's not printing, or you got to bribe somebody, like it is in Venezuela sometimes, to get a passport, right? Nationality is what causes, or it's the basis of visa-free access. I do agree. I think that with the move towards ETAs, okay, and the ability for countries to have a little bit of a stop before they give visa-free access to somebody, I do think that this is going to kind of create a situation where people that are from countries that currently have poor visa-free access are going to, if they have strong profiles, right, they're going to be in a position where they can kind of go through less rigmarole in order to get a tourist visa, because they're not as big of a threat of an overstay or of for working without authorization, etc. But I still believe, even in 100 years, okay, the country that you are a citizen of is going to be a factor, not necessarily a totally dispositive factor, but is going to be an important factor in your visa-free access to other countries, assuming you're applying through that citizenship. And that's for the simple reason, right? It's that CBP, Border Patrol, the immigration officials in all countries, okay, the instinct is, the presumption is that if you are trying to travel visa-free to their country, and you're from a country that's prosperous, that there's opportunity and all that you're less likely to illegally, to unlawfully overstay than if you're trying to visit that country from a poor country, okay, where there is an opportunity. That's a rock solid, embedded presumption. And I don't even think it's an unfair presumption, but I don't think that presumption is going anywhere at all, not even in 50 or 100 years. But I do think that we're going to have a situation where people. I think the example you use, Gabos, like a successful person from a poor country is not going to have to struggle as much with getting visa-free access to other countries. I agree, because I think they're going to get access to some sort of analog to an ETA, if it's not exactly, by ETA I mean electronic travel authorization. With regards to the statement, about the intergovernmental organization, yeah, that's certainly possible. I don't know if I see that as an improvement, though. I mean, whereas currently you are vulnerable to your country of citizenship to issue you a passport, and you're vulnerable to the diplomatic ties of your country of citizenship to try to get good visa-free access for you as a citizen or not. We still have a possibility nowadays to arbitrage, to move around, okay, to try to pick up a second or third citizenship, to if you have three citizenships, to choose which one of those three that you try to use when you access a fourth country, etc. And that arbitrage, that ability to pick up those little advantages in this lattice work, I think would largely be washed away if there's like a unified one big organization that is responsible for issuing the passports. But these are interesting things to watch. We'll see where it goes.
Just one thing there, I think apart from this whole issue of, how tied your passport is to your nationality. And I mean, really, when you think about it, a passport is it's such a lame document, right? It's all about your name and what country you're from. And there's so many other things that have come up as being important for entry over that we've seen even the last few years, like the pandemic. During the pandemic, it was almost more important for entry to a country. What was your vaccine status? Or if you could show that European Green Certificate or show that. And it was a completely parallel system to passports, but just as important for identity. So I think it's going to become, less maybe tied to nationality, but there's going to be all these kinds of other metrics that we probably can't even think of now, like tax clearance and even like ideology. I mean, we've heard all these reports. I don't believe like 90% of them, but all these reports about when you're coming into the US that they're looking at your social media and scanning, for basically ideological bents. But there's things like this, like vaccine status, like ideology that are becoming more and more relevant, and that a passport is just not set up to, take into account.
On purpose.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll jump
Go
in
ahead.
real fast and say, as a total side note, there are parts of the world where you can't travel without specific vaccinations. In Latin America, if you're leaving Brazil to any other Latin American country, you have to have that yellow World Health Organization issued vaccine certification saying you've received a yellow fever vaccine. And similarly, if you are traveling to Saudi Arabia, for religious reasons, you have to show proof that you were immunized against. Oh my gosh, what am I can't believe I'm blanking here. Um, it's the same one that same immunization you get in college for dorm room living, meningitis. And so, in effect, what you're saying is true from the pandemic. It was just applied more broadly, but there are certainly other pieces of information that a government has to collect in order to let you pass. And I would argue that in a world where one country doesn't trust another country's information or proof of identity, and something specific is important, like epidemiological risk, they're going to require something else for you to cross borders. So I think it's a great case study to show that there are specific times and places where something more than just your identity is needs to be collected, and collected from not just something issued by your government, but something issued by somebody else, like a health professional or some other type of international body.
The pandemic showed to Americans what most of the rest of the world already knows, which is visa-free access is not robust. It's far from guaranteed. It's conditional. It's highly conditional. And most Americans that are traveling nowadays, that are, I'd say, probably under 60, maybe, um, hadn't really lived through a period of time where a country that they expected visa-free access to imposed additional big conditions on it, like having a vaccination card or whatever it is. So that was, in my opinion, a big wake up call for Americans. To a lesser extent, I think people from countries that also have other countries that have strong visa free access, like European countries, etc. The control point of foreign countries for people visiting, I don't think that's going to change. Every country, as long as we have the nation state system, and that's another big if. I mean, we don't know how long that will last. I don't think the nation state system is going to last forever. But for however long we have the nation state system, they're going to jealously guard their borders, okay, or at least their ability to guard their borders, even if they have, like an uncontrolled zone, like, I don't know, France and Spain, for example, right? They're still going to jealously guard the ability to impose a controlled border if they want. The part that I think is more of a senseless restriction on people's freedom is the fact that nowadays the default is to be able to travel internationally, that to have a passport issued by a nation state, right? So I say that there are at least three parties to every entry to a country through a controlled border. There's at least three parties. There's number one, the country that you're entering, that's one party. Number two, you as the individual, you're the second party. And the third, I'm saying this is the default, not in every single instance. The third party is the country that issued your passport that you're using to travel there. Now, number one and number two makes perfect sense to me, okay, as why those should be parties to your entry to a country. But why should a third party, a country that issues you this document, okay, that is difficult to get, at least to get a recognized one, why should they have a veto on whether you're able to enter that country or not? And I'm not even talking about the instances in which you're relying on your nationality, right, to be able to enter that country or not. That to me is an unnecessary control point, right? And some countries, in some instances, for visa-free access, some countries will trust a third-party country's description or reference of your nationality, and in some cases they won't. And I'll just bring up two examples. So to enter the United States on ESTA, okay, which is our electronic travel authorization, you have to be a national of a country that's part of the ESTA program. I think there are 42 countries now. I think the most recently added one was Israel. Okay, so you got to be a citizen of that country. I'm using national and citizen interchangeably here, okay? And you also have to be traveling, this is the key part, on a travel document or a passport that's issued by that country. Okay, so you got to be a citizen of the country and you have to be traveling on a passport issued by that country. That's the US system. That's not the system necessarily all over the world. Okay, so for example, in order to enter Schengen, okay, if you have a nationality, okay, that the citizens of a country, the citizens of which have visa-free access to Schengen, okay, but you're traveling on another country's document or even an international organization's document, and that document references your nationality that gives you the right of visa-free access, you're supposed to be able to enter Schengen visa-free. So in that case, right, the recipient zone or country allows you to have some more freedom, some more flexibility. Okay, mix and match. I'm using my, the example used in one of the Schengen legal guidance is Colombia. I'm using my Colombian nationality and I'm combining that with a passport issued by another country that that references my Colombian nationality in order to enter Schengen. So that to me is, that's the passport issue, not citizenship, not visa-free access. That's the passport issue. The fact that in the world today, we default to needing a valid passport, okay, issued to you, and there are passports issued by countries that are not your country of citizenship, and sometimes by international organizations. Knights of Malta, for example, there's a couple hundred of those floating out. But the reality is, in practice, the vast majority of people are going to have a difficult time, if not an impossible time, getting an entity other than their country of citizenship to issue them a valid passport. This to me is this is the part that doesn't make sense except for government control. Okay, this is a huge restriction on international freedom of movement and therefore freedom of individuals. So the more, go ahead.
I was just curious, for those that think that we get away from a system where really the sovereigns are and it's not even the sovereigns, it's the first world dictating it to the rest of the world, as the gatekeepers of travel freedom, how does that happen? I struggle to see how that happens without the military superpowers as we know them to be nowadays changing in a material way, because I think that most sovereigns would view this almost as an act of war if they were to lose this or there were a threat to this, at least the two superpowers that exist on Earth at the moment.
Your question is, how do we get away from a system in which nation states have a near monopoly on issuance of passports?
For those that think that is likely, how do they surmise this coming to be? And I obviously ask this sincerely.
So I think there's a few levels here, right? Complete destruction of the obligatory passport for international travel system is kind of like, I guess the most powerful, I guess the outcome that gets the furthest away from our current situation. I don't know about that. I'm not sure. I don't have a strong opinion on if that'll happen when, well, I guess if on a long enough timeline, I guess eventually it will happen, but whether that would happen anytime soon. But where I see there being wiggle room, right, where little trends start with one country or two countries and then grow, is an uptick in countries that issue legal identity, okay, that is widely recognized, That to me is the toe in the door, okay, in the door jam, okay. Palau being an example, and that's part of the reason that I do these field, these field experiments. It's redneck research, like as I call it, right? This is nothing howdy-toddy academic. This is me saying, I got this Palau digital ID. I'm going to Bonds to buy alcohol. I'm going to tell you whether this worked or not as proof of my age. The more countries that issue legal valid ID, that is recognized by other countries or in other countries, right? The more I think we get to a situation where countries can issue more passports, okay, or that are recognized, okay, it's passports to non-citizens, excuse me, that are recognized by other countries. And I think we wouldn't be all the way there, okay, in terms of freedom from nation states as kind of monopolists on passport issuance in this situation, but we'd be half of the way there. I mean, if there was 5, 6, 7, 8 countries out there that for a fee, okay, would issue you a valid travel document, no visa-free access attached to it. Remember, that's a function of citizenship, but just the valid passport. And if that was recognized by a majority of countries, or at least half countries, okay, now people are really finding us getting away from that single sovereign dependence. That's my frame. That's the phrase I use for it: single sovereign document dependence. So that's why I'm interested in Palau. That's why I'm interested in other countries like this. We need more countries, okay, that will issue passports to non-citizens and for them to be recognized. How do we get there? Inverted? I don't know. I mean, I think the power of the market is the first thing that comes to my mind. Okay, a country's got to do it, take the risk, take the leap of faith, make a ton of money from it, not suffer any big consequences. And then just like with CBI, other countries are going to be looking over and saying, hey, they made a couple billion doing that and they're in better position. Maybe we can do something similar. Or maybe we could do something, related or the same thing. So, I don't know if that's exactly answer your question, Inverted, but in the short term, that's what I see as the most likely path forward if such a thing were to happen.
And then you see that slowly leading to, because it really comes down to Europe, the United States, Canada, blah, blah, a few others, deciding which passports are good or bad in the eyes of the rest of us. So you're saying maybe that we just get these kind of random documents that don't do anything from a visa standpoint, but as any of those begins to gain notoriety, trustworthiness, the program itself, etc., that maybe the nations that actually matter, which essentially decide the visa-free for all the CBIs right now, would consider that. It's almost like it is a different kind of CBI in a way. Like that is the way a rich person from India gets a better passport at the moment, right? CBI. So
What do you mean by better passport?
Well, because it seemed like Gabo was making the point, and it's obviously a valid one, that like if I'm born in Madagascar and I'm, super successful, whatever that means, the fact that I only have that document to travel on is obviously a hindrance, and it's probably the only hindrance I have if I'm otherwise successful and have a clean profile. So it sounded like Gabo was saying that in his view, that maybe the system where the first world decides how this person from Madagascar is essentially allowed to travel and live their life to a considerable degree would no longer continue in the future. I could be misunderstanding them.
Well, respectfully, Inverted, I think you're bleeding into talking about nationality now, not passports, and that's a different thing. Okay, visa-free access, treaty benefits, those are functions of citizenship, not functions of passport. And I'm talking about passports. I'm talking about the vulnerability a person has, most people, of only being able to get a passport from their country of citizenship. Right? These are different things. Right? The benefits that are attendant to a person's citizenship, and the issuance of a document, okay, that is required in our modern international system by default, right, with some exceptions, but by default, in order to travel internationally through controlled borders. So CBI, you get a citizenship, right? And then you apply afterwards for the passport. Now you have another document to travel on, and you have another country and their set of visa-free access and their set of diplomatic relations, their set of treaty benefits, like, for example, the E2 investor treaty with the United States for Grenada before the United States implemented the requirement that, Grenadian citizens by investment be domiciled for 3 years. Those types of things, that latter category, that's all a function of citizenship, not a passport. So I'm talking about, so both matter, no doubt. Absolutely no doubt, both matter. I don't think we're ever going to get away from a system where countries are careful or don't want to have a say directly in who gets to visit their country. I don't think that's going anywhere. Where I think there's room, like I said, wiggle room or room for improvement in the short term is this idea that you have to rely only on your country of citizenship to issue you the document, the passport that's required in the modern system to travel. That's more what I'm talking about. Does that make sense, Inverted?
This is Gabo here. Yeah, I mean, I was just hypothetically thinking, like, imagine because what you're saying is right, that your citizenship, your nationality determines your visa-free access and so on. But imagine a world where some sort of intergovernmental agency. I know it's a bad example, but short of a better example, imagine something like the United Nations, and let's say 80% of its members 80% of the delegates, whatever, they come up with a framework that they all agree on, that somebody can prove that they don't have a criminal record, prove that that they have enough, that they're financially stable, prove all these different things, and they would issue some sort of travel thing, whether it's digital or physical or whatever, to somebody, and it doesn't matter what their citizenship or nationality is. And 80% of those countries would recognize anybody with one of those travel documents to enter their country, and it wouldn't matter what their nationality or citizenship is. Now, this is sort of a light version of the abolition of the nation-state system itself, which seems to be, even though it's taking a long time, it seems to be somewhat where the world is going. In the same way that in the U.S., states used to be like their own countries almost, and now the differences are much less important. And so I think we're headed in that direction. But I think, I can see some sort of system where 80% of countries just say, yeah, listen, whatever their passport or nationality is, doesn't matter. If they have one of these documents, we agree that person has proven who they are, and we will honor them if they want to enter our country. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, as a preliminary, as a conditional approval, yeah, I could see that happening. That's very possible. As a rock solid, oh, for sure, you're able to come in, you're guaranteed to come in. No, I don't think we're ever going back to what I consider. Well, okay, to be fair, even pre-ETA, what I called true visa free was never rock solid, because even if you picked up your passport, okay, that showed your nationality as a U.S. citizen, you booked a flight, went to Europe, you still could be denied at the border. Still, Shenzhen, or even individual countries outside of Shenzhen, they still had the ability to deny you entry, right? It's just that was really, really unlikely. Okay, it was just it happened very infrequently compared to what I think we're going to start seeing coming up. So yeah, but I mean, Gabo, yeah, I think that's possible. It's certainly possible that a bunch of countries say, "Hey, we got this governmental organization. We think they have robust due diligence. We trust their due diligence. We're willing to effectively outsource, okay, our decision making for conditional visa-free access to this organization. And therefore, if you get this, then you can go." Yeah, I mean, I don't know how. I don't know if it'll happen, but that's certainly within the realm of what I would consider possibilities.
Yeah, because what we have today is we're increasingly in a world where people are passport shopping. I mean, I know it's an extremely niche thing overall, but I mean, you look at the Andrew Hendersons and so on of the world. This is a thing where, like, people are recognizing now that you can just sort of shop around and live in a certain country for so many years and so on to get this passport. And at the end of the day, as it gets more and more popular, it just looks more and more ridiculous. Like, really, why should you not be able to prove who you are and prove that you are a stable, financially stable person, and prove all these things to some sort of rigor that is agreed upon by a large number of countries, and just be able to travel with the document issued by that agency, and that agency could have delegates from each country, and if the requirements changed and one country didn't like it, they could just say, nope, we don't agree to any more of these travel documents issued from this date forward. I mean, so there would be ways around that. But to me, I see that's something more like where the world's going to be. Will it happen in our lifetimes? I don't know. I guess it depends how old you are, but I think that's definitely where the world's headed.
It's certainly possible, Gabo. But even if we even if that happens, if we have that system, I don't think we're ever, well, I don't say not ever, but that system would not foreclose people picking up multiple citizenship, right? Because so far we're only talking about one niche benefit of nationality, which is visa-free access to other countries. And that's not the only benefit of citizenship. I argue it's not even the most important benefit of citizenship. I say over and over again, immediate highest right of entry and residency to that country is the most important and the most robust benefit of citizenship. And, you know, in the hypothetical that we're talking about with the intergovernmental organization, you know, issuing, you know, kind of like a visa-free status, that wouldn't bear on, you know, the highest right of immediate residency and entry for residency in the country. People who have visa-free access can still be denied, and they are denied based off of other factors, based off of speech or, you know, criminal conviction or you know, even just a determination by a border official that you look like, even though I know you come from this country, but you look like an overstay risk. You know, you're 19 years old, or or you look like somebody who's coming here to engage in prostitution. People, you know, there's a ground of inadmissibility for that in the United States and in other countries. People get denied for that. So I think that the hypo that you're talking about, Gabo, yeah, maybe we get there for visa-free access. Maybe that's where we head. But I don't think that's going to change the instinct and the incentive to pick up multiple citizenships, because visa-free access is visa-free access. It's not immediate right of entry, residency, and work authorization in a country.
Yes, and to be clear, I also don't agree that visa-free access is like the end all be all. But I can imagine a world where once you have this document and you've proven yourself enough who you are, that you're stable, no crime, etc., that countries would also start to recognize that if you have one of these such documents, now it doesn't matter so much what your citizenship is, because you've already proven that you're a reasonably good person. Now, of course, this would require nations to change their laws, and there's a lot of bureaucracy and Congress and all this stuff. So I'm not saying it's going to be a quick process. I just I do think that's where the world's going, and I think, to be clear, I don't think this is going to happen very quickly. I think this is a lot of bleed between the idea that the nation state is somewhat fading away for a more global view, and that will come with serious drawbacks as well. Like the whole 1984 sort of thing, where it's just like one government trying to rule over everybody, and that would be terrible. But there is also a need for people to be able to do things and not just totally be tied to their nationality.
Hey, Gabo. I think that you have some interesting ideas about this hypothetical, and it's possible, I suppose. But I think a more realistic preliminary step toward getting there is actually separating identity from nationality. And I think that if there's, to use a blockchain term, if there's some kind of tokenization of the individual or the person as an identity, that allows for different countries, perhaps different sovereign nations, to make claims about that person. One country A might make a claim that that person is a citizen or a national of the country, and country B might say, well, they're also a citizen of country B as well. And those claims could be made or revoked on this hypothetical blockchain, but the identity of the individual still remains. And I think that that's kind of a preliminary step toward getting what you're talking about. And I see that as a lot more realistic, and that would allow for systems of visa-free access and citizenship benefits, both in the country of citizenship and abroad, to be handled. I don't really like that solution from a privacy standpoint, but that seems like a pretty realistic idea in my estimation.
Yeah, I agree, and I think from a privacy standpoint, it could be a complete and absolute nightmare. But nonetheless, I think it's a very probable outcome potentially.
Yeah, David, I'm going to agree with you there. I guess I'll use this opportunity to shill an infographic that I made about a year and a half ago. It's like three half circles nested inside one another. Patrick knows it. He's seen me post it. I posted like 5, 6 times. And the point of the infographic is basically what I write is basically 3 layers of vulnerability to travel, to international travel. And I put at the outside layer the passport, the visa, like a visa or visa-free access to a foreign country. And I put at the most inner layer your legal identity, your ability to prove your legal identity, which we don't hear about that much. It's not that hot of a topic, but it's actually the bedrock. It's the threshold. You cannot have any passport, or you might have the citizenship, but you cannot prove the citizenship, or any type of visa without legal identity. Legal identity is the primer, okay, that has to go down first before any paint goes down on top of it, proving your legal identity. And in the system that we're in currently, people rely predominantly on their country of citizenship to provide them what I would call robust proof of legal identity. Secondly, to countries that they have residency in. So, for example, you come to the United States, you get a green card, right? A legal permanent residence, and then a physical green card. Even if you lose all your documents from your country of citizenship, but you have that green card, you're still going to be able to use that for a lot of things. Okay. And then thirdly, and again, I hate to bore people coming back to Palau again, but this is part of the reason I think the Palau experiment is so interesting. Thirdly, documents issued by countries that you don't have an earnest residency. Now, I know the Palau program, they call it the digital residency ID. In fact, you don't have to have any physical presence there. You don't even have to be there, okay? So even though, irrespective of how Palau characterizes their own program, I consider it a remote ID program. I consider it a digital ID program more so than a digital residency program. And in fact, you don't actually get a right of residency pursuant to it. So this is the important primer, the important piece. And I think to David's point, if he wasn't saying this, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it, that has to be separated from citizenship. Not separated meaning like, oh, your citizenship, country of citizenship cannot issue those documents. But we as individuals, we have to have access to more entities that can and will issue legal identity that's recognized domestically and internationally, for us to get to a system. I'm saying us meaning like humans, individuals, where people can reliably mix and match more. Okay, my identity, and I have this status from this international or this intergovernmental organization, combined with a visa from a third country, etc. So we gotta make it so that we're not 100% reliant, or not, we're not technically 100% reliant, but we're not as reliant on just one country to issue us legal identity. That's to me is a key point to move towards any type of system where people have less single sovereign dependence.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on that on a bunch of stuff, but primarily the first one, I'm gonna give myself a compliment here and say that I still wish the Vatican would issue ID cards that you could participate in. I think that would be a great way for them to raise money while also monetizing the fact that they're a sovereign entity. Um, Two, part of it is exactly to your point. At its core, your citizenship is the foundation of your legal identity. I uh, have an example that came up. Gosh, this is like 9, 12 months ago. Someone, friend of a friend, reached out to me. Their parent, who is a first generation immigrant to the United States, lost their driver's license and at the same time couldn't find their passport because there was a bunch of tumult in the family, and the person who was responsible for passports passed away, and so they didn't know, they couldn't they lost their ID, they couldn't find their passport, and so someone referred them to me, and I said, well, since you're a first generation immigrant, the basis by which you will need to reestablish to get any of these IDs is either find your passport, or you have to use your naturalization certificate, because that was the only document that they had left. And of course, they didn't know where that was because they put it away 20 years ago. So, um, it brought back suddenly that someone who'd lived in this country for like almost 50 years suddenly realized that they had almost no legal identity, and they had to figure out a means to get around it. So I helped them pull an official copy of their naturalization certificate through USCIS. And lastly, to Gabo's point, um, I was gonna not push back. I was gonna actually add to it and say I do see this push and pull between whether or not a federal or a nation state can issue an ID, but they're not naturally incentivized to issue something that gives up their sovereignty, right? And because there's so many countries in the world nowadays that want visitors, but they still kind of want to uphold that identity, you see this explosion in digital nomad visas. And it's a way to kind of say, hey, we want you to come here. We don't want there to be, we want you to stay and spend money. You don't have a pathway to citizenship, but it's a way to open the doors for you to spend money there. It of course is still tied to your your citizenship, right? If you're an American with a U.S. passport, a digital nomad visa is going to be you know stamped in your passport. But it is kind of I think it's a first sign of that kind of push pull factor for kind of global mobility in a way that the nation you're going to isn't trying to incentivize you, despite your citizenship and passport still being tied and kind of intransigent with the nation you're coming from.
Great points. Okay, we've been going for about an hour and 32 minutes. It's been a really good conversation. Any last points, questions, comments, concerns? Anybody holding a disagreement inside that they've been dying to get out? Speak now or forever hold your peace, and then I'll ask for suggestions for any topics for our next space, mobility space number 46. Okay, sounds like we're going to wrap this one up. Anybody have any suggestions? We're coming down to the last 5 spaces that we're going to do with this series. Like I said, we are probably going to continue this series after a short break. We're going to continue to 51 and beyond. But anybody have any topics that they'd like to discuss for mobility space number 46, which will be on Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time?
Just as a thought bubble, this is an incomplete thought, but looking at 2026, we got the World Cup coming down the pike. 2028, we have the Olympics in, my home region of Southern California. I know that there's, generally when people attend these events, they're on a tourist visa, and people who are working are on essentially a work visa, and people who are press are typically on a press visa. But I'm wondering if there's a future world where um, there are event-driven visas where you want to go for a specific event, and therefore there's a larger threshold of like allotted visas or something like that. This is a little bit of a brainstorming idea, but I'm curious if this has been tried in the past or if there's room for this in the future.
Interesting, yeah. So as you alluded to, most people coming to the United States for sporting event are going to be coming as a B2 tourist or on ESTA. I'll let you in a little dirty secret, Patrick. In practice, the majority of journalists who come for a story or something in the United States, they just come on a B2 tourist visa or on ESTA. And it's not the best practice, but I can say in practice, in my opinion, that's what the majority come on. They don't actually come on a press visa. But anyway, I think that's an interesting topic. It's definitely US centric. I don't know. I'm interested in it. I would love to talk about it. It definitely correlates with a lot of my work. I'm not sure how interesting it would be for others, but I'll definitely take that under consideration. Any other suggestions, either from you, Patrick? You got a number 2, or anybody else want to suggest one? Gabo catapulted in here. He cannonballed with his first appearance on the space with a lot of good comments. Anybody have anything on their mind, topic wise?
You had a poll. This will passports die was one of them, but then you had 3 other choices, and I don't remember what the other 3 choices were, but I do remember for me it was a pretty close tie between this one and some other one. So just post the other 3 things in your poll. Yeah.
Great point. I forgot about that. Let me check. You're right. One was close as well. Let me see if I can pull that up real quickly. Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead.
Well, and did we talk about the whole Portugal? I haven't been a member of these previous spaces. Did you talk about the whole Portugal thing and the influencers and all that?
No, we didn't. In fact, that's probably the obvious choice for the next topic. I tweeted up a storm about it, but no, we have not talked about that. Okay, I think that's in the lead now. David, Patrick, what do you guys think about the Portuguese golden visa, as well as, you know, if I talk about this, I'm going to talk about the greater concept of how important it is to be crystal clear about what a timeline means, and what I consider the dishonest, peddling in terms. So yeah, I mean, if I'll have plenty to say if we choose that as a topic. I'm not sure if everybody's going to have the appetite for all these rants, but David, what do you think? Patrick?
Yeah, that's a great topic.
I think it's
Okay.
it's like too topical to ignore.
Okay, good point. Okay, we're going to do that. So mobility space number 46 is going to be on the Portuguese golden visa and changes in naturalization eligibility. I'm going to post that along with an article that I wrote in 2023. It's called The Hidden Attack Vectors on Your Citizenship. And in that article, I make the claim that time is a huge attack vector when you are on residency with the expectation of waiting out a period of time until you are eligible for naturalization. And I listed in that article specifically one of the huge sub-attack vectors as being new naturalization laws, even unlawful naturalization laws, right? A lot of these, I'll save this for most of this for the next space, but a lot of these influencers, they're trying to pivot to, it's unlawful. This is an unlawful change. This was unexpected. No. If you're a true citizenship expert, attorney, advisor, consultant, then you know that unlawful changes happen all the time. That's part and parcel of the industry. That's part of the game. You have to incorporate that in your decision making and your advising to clients. That's not an excuse to say, hey, we had no idea it was going to happen because it was unlawful. Okay, no. It should at least be on the radar. I'm not saying that people have the responsibility of exactly calling that this thing would happen right now, but it needs to always be considered as a possibility, right? So, okay, thank you guys for participating. Gabo, welcome. Hope you're able to join. Patrick, thank you as always for being a wonderful co-host. David, Annalisa, Alex, of course, Inverted. Really appreciate it. And of course, all of our anonymous listeners as well. Make sure to keep an eye out for the notifications for our 46 mobility space. Thank you. Have a great week.